Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are getting back into the book of Judges, but if you are new here, this is your first time, probably not the place to start. I suggest you start in Genesis because where I'm at is unconventional. I hold unconventional beliefs and I would hate to step on toes. If you hang around and you're unsuspecting, I will probably step on your toes, and it's just part of the process. For the rest of you, those who've been around for a while, you know where we're going. We're back in Judges because we left off in Judges, and we were in 4 because we left off in 3. So let's talk about Deborah and Barak. So Ehud had allowed them to prosper, right? Ehud came, son of Anath, and he too saved Israel, striking down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. That's all we got. That's the entirety of his story. But after he dies, the Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So this is a repeated pattern, right? We talked about the repeated pattern last time, but the repeated pattern is get saved by the hero, immediately fall back into whatever it is that caused you to go into grief, get saved by a hero. That's not a faithful people. It never has been through the entirety of it. And so the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. I'm not doing geography today. We've done a good bit of geography, and all of this is places we've talked about before. The commander of his forces was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, except that one. I don't know where that one is. And then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, because Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and he harshly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Now, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. Full stop. Consistency, right? We have a major problem because women aren't allowed. According to Exodus and Numbers, women are not allowed to do this. Now, we had Miriam, and Miriam was fundamentally part of the Israelites getting away from Egypt. She was the one that knew how to make the water spring forth. And when she died, they went thirsty, right? But we have another prophetess here. This is not kosher. Women aren't allowed to speak in assembly. They are not allowed to be the judge. According to the book. So it's consistency. I don't have a problem with it. Right? I don't have the slightest problem whatsoever with a woman talking about God or a woman being a judge or a woman going to work. I don't have a problem with any of that. I don't have a problem with women being exactly equal to and opposite of a man. I have no problem with that. So they did. This was a heavily patriarchal society, and women were severely oppressed and treated as property. Except for this one. She's done. She's doing all right by herself. And again, that's not to cast shade on the fact that a woman was doing it. It is to cast shade on the religion that banned that, then doing it. And she would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, where the Israelites would go up for her judgment. And she summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, Surely the Lord, the God of Israel, is commanding you, Go and march to Mount Tabor, taking with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera as commander of Jabin's army, his chariots, his troops, and to the river Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hand. And Barak said to her, If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And again, we see the cowardice of the men, right? There is a whole lot of subterfuge that happens to bring about the victories that Israel is involved in. You can talk about, oh, well, it was the hand of the Lord. Okay. So this man who is being commanded by God through the prophetess to go and do this thing is like, well, I'll only go if you go with me. Well, that's some coward stuff. That's what that is. That's yellow as the day is long. And so maybe you picked the wrong guy. Maybe God picked the wrong guy to get it done. I will certainly go with you, but the road you are taking will bring you no honor, because the Lord will be selling Sisera into the hands of a woman. And so Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. And 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now, I'm going to guess that the only reason that these 10,000 men showed up was because this prophetess of God was there with him. And that's why he wanted her to go with him. It wasn't like she's not directing things, right? But because she is there, it lends the authority that he needs. And so these people go with him. And that's why she says that I'll go with you, but if I go, then it's taking away from your victory, because they're not going to follow him, they're going to follow her. Now, Heber the Kenite had moved away from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent by the great tree of Zananim, which was near Kadesh. And when Sisera was told that Barak son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, he summoned all 900 of his iron chariots and all the men with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to river Kishon. And then Deborah said to Barak, Arise, for this is the day that the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone before you? And so Barak came down from Mount Tabor, with 10,000 men following him. And in front of him the Lord routed with the sword Sisera, all his charioteers, and all his army. Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. And then Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and the whole army of Sisera fell by the sword, and not a single man was left. Most likely, what happened was that the ground got a little bit mushy around this river, and the chariots didn't function quite so well. Now, I don't understand how a experienced charioteer would allow themselves to get into such a position, because if your chariot don't move, then you die, right? That's just how it happens. It probably has something to do with the prophetess being able to manipulate some things we've talked about before, and there is absolutely no evidence of that right here, right? Other than abandoning the chariot and fleeing on foot, because you move faster than this thing being pulled by horses. Now, that's a rocky ride, right? Like if you're following a horse at a full gallop in a chariot, that is not an easy ride by any means. You're bouncing, provided you're moving. You're bouncing around. It is very difficult. If the ground is not level and you hit a bump, there's not a whole lot of shocks, right? So you're just doing whatever the ground says at a high rate of speed. So maybe that's why he abandoned the chariot. Maybe it wasn't that the ground turned to mush. But it's a little bit weird that this is a heavy cavalry unit, right? That's what the chariots are. They're a heavy unit. And so for them going into infantry is not that big of a deal. Even considering like they had 9,000 chariots, right? Was it 900 chariots? How many chariots was it? 900 chariots. Okay, and then they got 10,000 men. So yeah, that's a good deal to charge into on a chariot. So there's not a whole lot tactically here that makes a lot of sense, right? But we know that exaggerations happen. We know that the story doesn't always get handed down to us quite as it happened, and that's not the important part. If it was important to note that God intervened, they would have told us, right? They would have told us straight out that God turned the ground to mush. The important part is what happens next. The important part is what happens to the general, because this is what should absolutely happen, right? And meanwhile, Sisera had fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to greet Sisera and said to him, Come in, my lord. Come in with me, do not be afraid. So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. So this woman who lives in the land where this man has peace with someone, right? They are living in this land. Now, this is saying that they came from the other land, and that's why she did it. But they're living there peacefully, and then she recognizes that this is the general of the the armies that are for her land. Like, this is you recognizing the army that is responsible for your defense. And you welcome this man in, not just welcome him in, but like invite him in. Please come in here. Don't be afraid of me. And she covers him up, and he just got out of battle, has barely escaped with his life. All of his command is dead. And Sisera says to her, please give me a little bit of water to drink because I'm thirsty. And so she opened a container of milk and gave him a drink and covered him again. So she didn't even give him what he wished. He just wanted some water. She gave him some milk. There's probably some significance to that. I don't know the lore. But if somebody asks me for water, I'm going to give them water. And if they ask me for milk, I'm going to give them milk. But it's a little bit weird that he would ask for water and be given milk. And so she opens the container of milk and gives it to him and then covers him up. Stand at the entrance to the tent, he said, and if anyone comes and asks you, is there a man here? Say no. But as he lay sleeping from exhaustion, Heber's wife, Jael, took a tent peg, grabbed a hammer, and went silently to Sisera. And she drove the peg through his temple and into the ground where he died. She told this man, come into my house, you will be safe. And then she drove a tent peg, not a nail, a tent peg, through his head and into the ground. Now, you can try to justify that by saying that she was doing the Lord's will. I will not make that argument. I will not in any manner say that this man who was not aggressive in a land that he believed was peace, after being invited in, was in any way, was there a justification for what happened? Because you can't just strike him once and drive his head into the ground. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's bones in the head. And I mean, you can get right here at the temple, and it's weak right there, right? And there's a weak spot on the other side. And if you line that up perfectly right, you could probably get it through with 2 strokes if you get it just right. I'm willing to bet she didn't get it just right. I'm willing to bet the first time she hit him, his eyes opened up and his body did something. Now, he may not have been conscious, but I'm willing to bet that that's what happened. And so he jerks around and she hits him again and probably again. And that's okay. It's absolutely fine because, you know, God instructed you to do that. I refuse. And when Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to greet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man you're seeking. And so he went in with her, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg through his temple. And on that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. And the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. And again, I am going to point out that they are saying that this king of Canaan is being aggressive towards them. And at the time it's true, because they have conquered the land that belonged to the king of Canaan. Right? Now, they've lived there for years. But does that make it right? In my eyes, conquest is the law of humanity up until very recently, and apparently it's still going on, but it's not as well received as it used to be. It used to be an acceptable measure for expanding your territory, and it was not a culture that believed that. It was all cultures that believed that if you could take the land and you could defend the land, then it was your land. But when this campaign started, remember, those people were living peacefully in their own lands that they had existed in since the flood. Since the last cataclysm that destroyed the earth, these people had existed here. And some guy, some random shepherd comes walking through who's not even from there. He's from across the Euphrates. And he comes wandering through their land, and God tells him, you know what? This is all going to be yours one day. And he tells his kids that. And his kids tell their kids that. And they get this whole lore built up around this that God told this one guy 1,000 years ago, or however long it was, and said, this is going to be your land. All of this is going to belong to you and your descendants, and all the people who live here now, you are going to be justified in getting rid of. And I refuse to believe that. Now, I can believe that entity that he made covenant with, I can believe that entity would make that deal. But I don't believe that the God of creation would. I believe that there was enough wilderness still then to lead Israel to a promised land where there was actual milk and honey. I believe that. God was capable of that. They were just across the mountains in Egypt. They could have went into South Africa, into the sub-Saharan continent of Africa. And there was lots of places to disappear. The Ethiopians did that, right? Why lead these people into the wilderness? In the wilderness being desert. To give them a land that they still have to fight for every day. That was not the promise. That was not the promise at all. And then get gaslit into thinking, well, it's your fault that I didn't keep my promise. God could have very well kept his promise and ran off these people with no bloodshed being necessary, but that was not the entity involved. The entity involved needs the bloodshed. It needs the bloodshed. That is its sustenance. That is why there is a blood sacrifice. It wasn't for your sins. There was no need for a cow to die because you slept with your neighbor's wife. You shouldn't be sleeping with your neighbor's wife. It is a bad thing to do. But you should just realize, oh man, that was terrible. And you make restitution to the actual injured parties. And then you don't do that again. Right? That is the required sacrifice, not a cow or a sheep or a lamb or a goat. That is not what is required for your sin. Now, I cut on to this part from the conquest. And conquest was our history. Violence was our history. It is not acceptable to us, but it was to them. So they took this land, and they took it justifiably. But the people who were there have a justifiable cause to take back their land. And we have a tendency in all of the religions that follow these particular beliefs of thinking that they had a justification for going in there and taking it. And I'm going to tell you they didn't. Like, you can get into the argument that God told them, and I don't believe that. I know that makes me a heretic. I know that's unconventional beliefs, but God is not telling you to go take somebody else's land. If God wants to give you that land, he will. He will get rid of the people, and he will give you that land. You will not have to spill the blood of a person who is living peacefully. You will not have to do things to women and children that should never be done, right? Like men voluntarily exchange the blows most of the time. Like, not necessarily in this record, but most of the time. Men are going voluntarily into the combative situations because, quite honestly, this shit's kind of fun. It's how we're built. It's a nature that we need to overcome. But the children ain't doing nothing. Why you gotta do what you did? Because God told you to go kill kids? I don't buy that at all. I don't. And I know that makes me a heretic, but I'm okay with that. I'm going through here my rationale for why I believe in God, but not necessarily these religions. I do believe in God. I believe in the Creator with a firmness that cannot be shaken. But I'm telling you, with another firmness that cannot be shaken, God did not tell you to kill 28 million people. Let's get into the song of victory. And on that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinadab, sang this song. When the princes take the lead in Israel, when the people volunteer, bless the Lord. Listen, O kings, give ear, O princes, I will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord, the God of Israel. O Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens poured out rain, and the clouds poured down water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. So now we have what happened. Right? I read this, and I don't know why it didn't click, but this is it, right? This is what happened to the chariots. The prophetess went out, and she called down rain. We have seen precedent for that. We have seen a prophetess control the waters. That is one of the things that they are able to do. The mountains quake. Okay. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted, and the travelers took the byways. Life in the villages ceased. It ended in Israel, until I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. When they chose new gods, then war came to their gates. Not a shield or spear was found among 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with the princes of Israel, with the volunteers among the people. Bless the Lord. You who ride white donkeys, who sit on saddle blankets, and you who travel the road, ponder the voices of the singers at the watering place. Ponder the voices of the singers at the watering place. Why did they break it like that? It's so weird. It's so you don't pay attention to things. That's why. And you who travel the road, ponder the voices of the singers at the watering places. There they shall recount the righteous acts of the Lord, the righteous deeds of his villagers in Israel. And then the people of the Lord went down to the gates. Awake, awake, O Deborah, awake, awake. Sing a song. That's interesting. Arise, O Barak, and take hold of your captives, O son of Abinadab. We've talked about sound, right? We've talked about the manipulation of sound and how it can do things. Sound can raise water up, and it can cause water to come down. I've got a video on that. And it's interesting to note that, right? Sound, in my belief, was the catalyst for the Jericho situation, right? They generated something because they didn't have the tabernacle to generate. So the marching was the generation of the necessary energies. And so here she is singing a song and causing it to rain so much that the chariots become bogged down. That's interesting. I'm willing to bet that same song not only called down rain, but caused the waters to come up, because there is precedent for that too. And then the survivors came down to the nobles. The people of the Lord came down to me against the mighty. They came down from Ephraim with their roots in Amalek. Benjamin came with you, your people after you. The commanders came down from Machir, the bearers of the marshal's staff from Zebulun. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah, and Issachar was with Barak, rushing into the valley at his heels. In the clans of Reuben there was great indecision. Why did you sit among the sheepfolds, to hear the whistling of the flocks? In the clans of Reuben there was great indecision. Gilead remained beyond the Jordan. Dan, why did you linger by the ships? Asher remained at the coast and remained in his harbors. Zebulun was a people who risked their lives. Naphtali, too, on the heights of the battlefield. Kings came and fought, and then the kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo, but they took no plunder or silver. by the waters of Megiddo. Y'all know where Megiddo is? That's Armageddon. So this is the precursor to the battle of Armageddon. It is Israel and Canaan fighting in the Holy Land at the Battle of Megiddo. It's an interesting precursor. And from the heavens the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away. The ancient river, the river Kishon. Why did maybe I didn't read this. Maybe I skipped it because it was a song. I do that sometimes. It's weird. March on, O soul of my strength. In my the river moved. That's what they're saying here. The river moved. the heavens, the stars fought, and from their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away, the ancient river, the river Kishon. Now, I get often into the cataclysm that is coming and how the stars will literally move. Like, we will literally see a sign in the sky at the end of times. It will be clear and visible and new and undeniable. There will be no, maybe it's there, maybe it's conspiracy. It's going to be a clear addition to our sight. First at night and then during the day you will be able to see this sign. It will cause people to quake in fear across the entire planet, and it will cause great harm. There will be many, many things that happen because of this sign that appears, and most of them are outlined in Revelation, which we will get to eventually. Part of that is the stars in heaven fighting. They move due to the electromagnetic disturbance caused by this intrusion. Now, whether this intrusion is a planet, as some believe, or if it is the galactic current sheet, as some believe, regardless, I think it's going to show up. And then it will affect our magnetics and the earth will wobble. Right? I think that it has happened in previous times at various points in history to a greater and lesser degree. There is a cycle that happens every 12,000 years where there's a magnetic reversal on the planet and there's a 90-degree shift. There's evidence for that. I'm not going to dive into it here. But in between those 12,000 years, there's a 6,000-year cycle, which is a flood as opposed to the fire of the 12,000 years. And there is also many cycles in between the 1 and 6 and the 6 and 12. This was probably part of one of those mini cycles. I know that was a long way to get to that, but these priestesses conceivably, in my mind, have a foreknowledge of that. It does not have to be of divine origin, but it can be. So maybe they have something that tells them that the magnetics are getting a little wonky. Maybe they can meditate and see it from outside of their body. I believe all of that is possible. I don't know what they did. But she brought them to the place at the right time for the stars to fight, the river to move, and her to sing down rain and probably raise up water. Maybe she caused it, maybe it was timing. Maybe it was God. I don't know. But what we see is what happened, right? And none of that is outside of the scope of reality. For me, I can explain that away with the electric universe. I believe in God, absolutely. I don't believe that God gets involved in the minutia, right? I don't believe that God is involved in the individual battles of the creatures that he created. I think he says, don't go kill nobody. Like, that was literally like the first commandment. Like, go forth and multiply and shed no blood. Like, that's literally what he said. And so I don't believe that he is giving favor. I believe that these priests know how to access the things that are going to happen, or have been taught by these entities to manipulate the things that are going to happen. I don't believe that it is God directly intervening in these things. It can be an entity. We've seen the entity several times. There's one that lives by the mountain of foreskins. All right. March on, O soul. March on, O my soul, in strength. And then the hooves of the horses thundered, the mad galloping of his stallions, because morose, says the angel of the Lord, bitterly curse Morose, bitterly curse her inhabitants. For they did not come to help the Lord, to help the Lord against the mighty. And that's another thing. Remember I said that Israel was not a nation, right? It was, but it wasn't like a consolidated thing. It was a very loose republic. It was 12 individual nations who agreed to act as one. And right here, we see their problem of not acting as one ever. Like, they do during Joshua, and they do sporadically, but like here, most of the tribes did not respond to this danger, to the country. That was the fall. That was the problem. It wasn't because of an Asherah pole. It wasn't like, you shouldn't be holding idols, because then they become your idols. Right? And we're not going to get back into idol worship, but it's not because they were worshiping the idols that they went wrong. It's because they gave away the law that they went wrong. And I know that sounds really weird, like, well, that's the same thing, but it's not. The law was that they were supposed to help each other and be the nation that rises up from this loose confederation. And they didn't. They each went about their own business, and when danger showed up, they let whoever was there handle it. Most of the time. Most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a magnificent bowl she brought him curds. She reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera and crushed his skull. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he collapsed, he fell, and there he lay still. And at her feet he collapsed, he fell. Where he collapsed, there he fell dead. Sisera's mother looked through the window. She peered through the lattice and lamented. Why is his chariot so long in coming? What has delayed the clatter of his chariots? Her wisest ladies answer, indeed, she keeps telling herself, are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A girl or two for each warrior. Remember I was telling you about that patriarchal society? A plunder of dyed garments for Sisera, the spoil of embroidered garments for the neck of the looter. So may all your enemies perish, O Lord. May those who love you shine like the sun at its brightest. And the land had rest for 40 years. This is not honorable. This is not valorous. It's a subterfuge. It is manipulation. By all means, if you have magic, use that shit. If you have access to the ability to do what you're supposed to, like, to lay waste to your enemies, to call a river up from the ground and move it in its course, or call down rain. Like, if your God is giving you that, then by all means use it. But it's not honorable, right? You can't fight against magic. There's no defense that these people have. There's no defense to killing a man in his sleep with a tent peg. There's no defense in sneaking in a city in the middle of the night and murdering people in their beds. There's no defense to hamstringing horses. Like, I have to believe that if God himself was to give me the command to go forth because this is a battle worth fighting, then he is going to give my sword the ability to fight. But not that he is going to call down thunderous hail. I don't expect that. Now, it's great. Don't get me wrong. But why call me to fight if you're going to make the fight? It's the inconsistency of the promise and the delivery, right? Like, they were promised no fight. They were promised to just take the land and that it would be wiped out completely, and they would take possession of it. And while they were still faithful, they began, and the promise was not fulfilled at all. They were not just given the land. They had to go in and fight through it bloodily. Now, we're going to get into this next part, and then because it's kind of long too, and it goes along the same lines. Like, this whole book is going to be like this. Like, it's a whole lot of, yeah, God probably didn't tell you that, or something along those lines. And again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, so he delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. Whoa, wait, full stop. Y'all remember what happened to Midian? Y'all remember where Midian went? Midian is already gone. Midian is where Moses' father-in-law Jethro lived. And it is where the Israelites returned for help, and it is where they went and destroyed them. Every man, woman, and child. Not to take possession of the land, but just purely out of vengeance and to fuel themselves to go into the land that they were taking possession of, the Amorites. And so, how? They've already destroyed Midian. How do they now have to go back and destroy Midian again? We got to lie in one spot or the other. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. And because of the Midianites, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. And whenever the Israelites would plant their crops, the Midianites, the Mechalites, and other people of the east would come up and invade them, encamping against them as far as Gaza and destroying the produce of the land. They left Israel with no sustenance, neither sheep nor oxen nor donkeys. For the Midianites came with their livestock in their tents like a great swarm of locusts. They and their camels were innumerable, and they entered the land to ravage it. Israel was greatly impoverished by Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Now, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who told them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I delivered you out of the hand of Egypt and all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land, and I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You must not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you did not obey me." Remember, it's all your fault. And then the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." "Please, my Lord," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all of his wonders, of which our fathers told us, saying, Has not the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Am I not sending you?" "Please, my Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house." "Surely I will be with you," the Lord replied, "and I will strike down all the Midianites as one man." And Gideon answered, "And if I have found favor in your sight, give me a sign that it is you speaking with me. Please do not depart from this place until I return to you. Let me bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will stay until you return." And so Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread and an ephah of flour. And he placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and brought them out to present to them under the oak. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. And then the angel of the Lord extended the tip of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And the fire flared from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. We'll finish this. And when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Oh no, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, Be peace be with you. Do not be afraid, for you will not die. And so Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, The Lord is Peace. And to this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abizarites. Y'all see the problem? Who sees the problem? Y'all tell me in the comments if you saw the problem before I tell you. Remember when the conquest of the land was over and the tribes are returning home across the Jordan. And in memory of what they have just accomplished, they decide that they are going to build an altar. And the entirety of the nation comes up and says, hey, no. And the only reason they got away with their life as 3 tribes or 2.5 tribes, the only reason they got away with not being wiped out the same way everybody else was the fact that they had not actually made sacrifice upon that altar. Because they are bound by covenant with God to not make sacrifice anywhere but the tabernacle at the present time. Like that becomes the temple later, but for now it's the tabernacle. And so, we have a problem. This is a very big contradiction because he just offered sacrifice on an altar he built that was not at the tabernacle. Now, you can say that it was in the presence of an angel of God. Does that negate God himself's word? Right? The covenant made with God himself? Now, I'm going to venture out into my usual spot here and say that this entity is not God, nor does he represent God. And so, it's okay for him. Now, it is also entirely possible that this entity does represent the other side of what we have seen. Like, that comes into play several times, right? We'll see which one it is through the fruits of what happens, but there are times where an angel intervenes, and it is for the exact opposite of what the other angel wanted. The easiest to point out is Abraham's sacrifice. You had one entity said, tie your child to this rock and slay him. And then you had another entity that stopped him and said no. And like it's literally described as another angel. Said no. That's not the right move, boss. Use this instead. That to me is a perfectly reasonable explanation of what happened there. That there are 2 opposing factions, 2 opposing fallen ones, or maybe one of them's not fallen. I don't know. But there are angels and there are not good angels, right? The fallen angels, the demons, or however they're classified. Now, I think demons are like literally a different classification than the fallen angels, but some people think of them that way. But it's possible that we're dealing with the wrong entity, right? This is not the same entity that was made covenant with at the various covenants throughout. Okay. And I know that's heretical, but and so the Lord said to him, peace be with you, you will not die. And to this day the altar stands in that place where altars are forbidden. And on that very night the Lord said to Gideon, take your father's young bull and a second bull 7 years old, and tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. And then build a proper altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold. And with the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down, take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering. And so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city, he did it by night rather than in the daytime. And when the men of the city got up in the morning, there was Baal's altar torn down, with the Asherah pole cut down beside it, and the second bull offered up on the newly built altar. Who did this? They said to one another. And after they had investigated thoroughly, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. And the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son, he must die, because he has torn down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Are you contending for Baal? Are you trying to save him? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal is a god, let him contend for himself with the one who has torn down his altar." And so on that day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend with him, because he has torn down Baal's altar. So, one time breaking the covenant was not enough. Let's do it again. But we're going to do it in the cover of night, because that's how men of valor act, right? Behold, man of valor, here's something valorous for you to do in the middle of the night. And again, it seems like maybe God just picked the wrong representative, right? Maybe God didn't know what he was doing when he picked it. But then he doesn't even come forward. Then he does not even have the boldness of the Lord to say that the Lord told me to do it. He does it in the cover of the night, and then they have to discover who did it. Then they have to be told who did it. He didn't tell them. Somebody else told them. Because he gathered people. He took 10 servants. So the servants ratted him out. And that's how they found out who did it. It wasn't because he went and says, "Yeah, I did that for God. What's up?" Like, he wasn't trying to buck on it. Right? God told me to do, like, if God told me to go and do whatever, right, I'm just going to go do whatever. And then I damn the consequences. You want to sacrifice me to Baal? So be it. But that's not what this is. Like, now, my God's not going to tell me to go kill nobody. He's not going to tell me to go mess up nobody's temples, because he doesn't care about your temples. But if he told me to go wherever and stand, like, go take this bullet for this person, and that's what I'm just going to go do. And I'm going to do it boldly. I ain't going to cower in it. But that's God's chosen, right? And then all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other people of the east gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, who blew the ram's horn, and rallied the Abiezrites behind him, calling them to arms. And Gideon sent messengers throughout Manasseh, as well as Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they came up to meet him. And then Gideon said to God, "If you are going to save Israel by my hand, as you have said, then behold, I will place a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there is dew only on the fleece, and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And that is what happened. When Gideon arose the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. And then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, let it be dry and the ground covered with dew." And that night God did so. Only the fleece was dry and the ground covered with dew. Now, I have no doubt that God can do that, right? No doubt whatsoever. My problem is with the choice of the instrument, right? He's like, God told me to cut down this temple, but I'm going to sneak about it and do it, and I'm going to deny it. And then he said, I'm going to sound the horn, but I'm only going to go to battle if you do this. Okay, you did that, all right. All right. But hold on. But if you do this too. And then those two signs were enough, right? Now, the one sign should have been enough. Being told should have been enough. When God tells you, you ain't got no doubt. And early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the men with him camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp north of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And then the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many people for me to deliver Midian into their hands, lest Israel glorify themselves over me, saying, My own hand has saved me. Now, therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, Whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. And Jerubbaal would be the first one. And so 22,000 of them turned back, but 10,000 remained. So he had 32,000 people show up, and 22,000 of them left. And then the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many people. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you. If I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. And so Gideon brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog, and from those who kneel to drink. And the number of those who lapped the water with their hands to their mouth were 300, and all the others knelt to drink. And then the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped the water, I will save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand. But all the others are to go home. So he calling out the Marines. The reasoning here is blind obedience. Like, I don't understand how the people who are not situationally aware to cup the water and bring it to them, rather than going down to the water and putting their face in the lake. Like, I don't know how that is the salvation for us, but okay, you can say you took the baddest ones, I guess. Like, they don't care; they're just going in. Like you're surrounded by hostile forces, right? Maybe not surrounded, but there are hostile forces in the area, and you're not a large force, right? There were 32,000 and 22,000 leave, and then you got 10,000 left, and you take the 300 who you tell them all go drink from that water, and then 300 of them stick their face down into the water and lick the water like a dog, and that's the ones you take. It's just whatever. That night the Lord said to Gideon, get up and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hands. But if you are afraid to go to do so, then go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and listen to what they are saying, and then your hands will be strengthened to attack the camp. So he went with Purah his servant to the outpost where armed men were guarding the camp. And again, he is such a valorous man. He is so filled with courage that God says, all right, if you're scared, go down there and listen. And he did. He was scared, so he went down there and listened. And now, the Midianites, Amalekites, and all the other people of the east had settled in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were as countless as the sands on the seashore. And as Gideon arrived, a man was telling his friend about a dream. Behold, I had a dream, he said, and I saw a loaf of barley bread come tumbling into the Midianite camp, and it struck the tent so hard that the tent overturned and collapsed. And his friend replied, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has delivered Midian into the whole camp into his hand. Sure, that happened. And when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, get up, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and gave each man a ram's horn in one hand, and a large jar in the other, containing a torch. Watch me and do as I do, Gideon said. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our horns, then you are to blow your horns from all around the camp and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the changing of the guard. And they blew their horns and broke the jars that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew their horns and shattered their jars, holding the torches in the left hands and the horns in the right. They shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And each Israelite took his position around the camp. and the entire Midianite army fled, crying out as they ran. And when the 300 ram's horns sounded, the Lord sent all the men of the camp against one another with their swords. The army fled to Beth Shittah towards Narah, as far as the border of Abel Melah near Tabbath. And then the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, as far as Beth-barah." And so the men of the Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth-barah. They also captured Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And so they pursued the Midianites, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. So again, it is not valorous combat, it is subterfuge in the middle of the night. It is a pattern. Right? You can say that it is tactically guerrilla warfare, and you're not wrong. You can say that they were justified, and you can make that argument. I won't. But what they did was sneak up in the middle of the night, partially surround the enemy, and then they blew their horns and broke the jars in their hands. Now, this is interesting. It says containing a torch, right? It says literally, and put ram's horns in empty jars, large jars with torches inside, into the hand of all. Maybe a lantern type device, but here's the problem. The problem is airflow. A torch is a primitive fire device. It is not at all efficient in the way that a lantern is. Now, a lantern uses draw oil in a wick, and it has sufficient airflow to keep that wick in combustion. A torch, however, is about the size of your fist balled up, and it is a fire on the end of that fist. Right? Now, they can be smaller, but to be this effective, they would have to be that large. In order to have the airflow to supply the fire of the torch inside of there, this would have to be an enormous jar, right? So you're carrying the ram's horn in one hand and a torch in the other hand. What's carrying the jar? That's got to be a big jar. It can be a small jar. The torch will go out. Now, it's possible, and this will absolutely come back into play as we get into the prophets. There are substances that would react with air, that react with water, and react with other things to provide combustion quickly. Now, if you were to have a torch coated in one of these substances that was being suffocated by being held inside of a pot, it wouldn't have to be a big pot. And then when you pulled the pot off, the exposure to air would oxidize the substance and create combustion on your torch. That is a much more likely scenario, in my opinion. Another thing to consider is the fact that these people became confused, right? Now, most people are unaware of military discipline in the slightest degree, but I was in the military. I understand military discipline. Now, it is not unreasonable to assume that they were a mostly undisciplined force, but even still, if they were fairly wild, they held some kind of discipline. It is impossible to be an effective force without at least some kind of discipline, and they were an effective force. They set a watch. The watch was relieved on schedules. That is fairly organized. They were surprised in the middle of the night, but I promise you that if you're surprised in the middle of the night as a fighting force, you are not going to begin attacking yourself. You are going to group yourself in such a way as to defend from the aggression. You will identify immediately hostile from non-hostile, and you will group yourself accordingly. That is an immediate thing. They didn't have to worry about gunfire. You had to see the people, right? And the ones with the torches are the ones that you're going to be trying to get. I understand that it is confusing, right? But there's no such thing as so much confusion that you start stabbing your battle buddy, right? Like it just there is, right? There are situational, but this is in camp. They are encamped with watches set. They are surprised, but they are expecting combat. It's not like random came out of the wilderness and it's a group of 10 people. This is an army encamped. There had to be something affecting them outside of just seeing these people appear in the middle of the night. As shocking as that is, it is not tactic breaking. It will not break your training. Their training is stay alive, and the way to stay alive is to group yourself and fight effectively. That is their whole goal in life. Now, I don't know. Maybe there was something in the jars, and them breaking the jars that were in their hands and blowing their horns, maybe that made something happen. Maybe it wasn't an oxidation situation. Maybe there was something else. Maybe there was a liquid in there and they dipped it in there and it was just said that they, I don't know. That's all pure speculation. But there's no way you were holding a torch in a jar and carrying your ram's horn in your other hand. Like, you could have it hanging, but you weren't carrying it in your hand and carrying this jar over fire. Like, your hand's going to catch on fire. It's going to get hot. There's so many problems with that. All right, let's do this last bit of Gideon. And then the men of Ephraim said to Gideon, "Why have you done this to us? Why did you fail to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they contended with him violently. But Gideon answered them, "Now, what have I accomplished compared to you? Are not the gleanings of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has delivered Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian, into your hand. What was I able to do compared to you?" When he said this, their anger against him subsided. And then Gideon and his 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it, exhausted, yet still in pursuit. So Gideon said to the men of Succoth, "Please give my troops some bread, for they are exhausted, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the leaders of Succoth asked, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we should give bread to your army?" "Very well," Gideon replied. "When the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness." And from there he went up to Penuel and asked the same from them. But the men of Penuel gave him the same response as the men of Succoth. And so Gideon told the men of Penuel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the people of the east. 120,000 swordmen had already fallen. I believe that God is the God of miracles. I believe that God can pull a victory out. I do not believe that God scared 120,000 men bad enough to stab each other with swords until death on light of 300 men. And these 300 men pursue 15,000 men. Nothing is impossible to God, but this is the closest thing to it. There is no way the hubris of any man is going to allow him to flee with 15,000, that's what it says. He's got 15,000 men out of the 120. But 15,000 men are fleeing from 300? No. No. That is, again, one of those things. Right? There's just no. Now, with the absolute caveat that if them torches were something else, what if them torches weren't torches? What if them torches were shamirs? Or fractions of the shamir? And they were able to direct the flame with these fractions and these horns to do something to 120,000 swordsmen that had already fallen. Maybe that is what cast them into confusion. Maybe what they had in their hand was not a torch. Right? Let's look at that word. I didn't do a word study on that. Let's do that real quick. And when all of them blow our horns, I want the first instance. It's right here. All right, 16. Let's pop it out and look at it. All right, let's look at torch. A flaming torch, lightning flashes. Well, that's interesting. The torches and firebrands. Let's see here in Strong. A firebrand, a burning lamp, lightning, and torches. Well, that changes the context of everything. I should have done that earlier. So what they pulled out of this jar was lightning. Well, I guess that would cause some confusion in the ranks, wouldn't it? That would make me run from 300. If 300 guys started casting lightning, that would cause a problem. Yeah. I'm out, right? I see out of the darkness, right? You're getting roused by the clamor, right? You're in your tent, you're asleep, you're not on watch. Maybe you just got off a watch, maybe you got the next watch. But you're asleep in your tent, you're knocked out, boy. And you hear, "Tarms, Tarms." So you wake up and you jump out the tent, and you grab your stuff, and you find your battle buddy, and y'all back up, and y'all getting ready to go because you're under attack in the middle of the night. And then people start throwing lightning at you. Well, that'll change all kinds of shit. That will cause some confusion in the ranks because this isn't arrows. Y'all are throwing lightning. And you had to narrow it down to 300 people because you needed 300 people who would just follow orders, who were so empty-minded as to just do what they were told to do without questioning it. And if they knelt beside the water and they lifted it up and they drank where they could see their surroundings, then they thought too much. But if they laid on their belly and they put their face in the water and they lapped it like dogs, well, then they didn't. And then they were just dumb enough to charge when they need to and to use this weapon without having to understand it. That definitely sounds like some crayon eaters to me. Like, no knocking my boys. They rode on our ships. They're my homies. But that does change some things, don't it? It explains why these 15,000 men were afraid of these 300. Because there's no other explanation, right? You can say what you want about divine intervention and how, like, God can turn hearts. God can make people flee in fear. God can throw down a meteor and stop time. He can resurrect people from the dead. Like, all of that's possible. But the most likely scenario is that they had access to some kind of a power that we have seen evidence of prior to this that allowed them to do something that the armies were not expecting. And when that happened, and they were not expecting electricity, right? They were not expecting lightning to be thrown at them, like Zeus and the rest of the heroes of old, like almost all of them through lightning, right? And so, there we go. Now we have an explanation that actually works. 120,000 had already fallen. Gideon went up by way of the caravan route east of Noboah and Jogbaha, and he attacked their army, taking them by surprise. And when Zabah and Zalmunna fled, Gideon pursued and captured the two kings of Midian, routing their entire army. And after this, Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle along the ascent of Heres. There he captured a young man of Succoth and interrogated him. The young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 leaders and elders of Succoth. And Gideon went to the men of Succoth and said, Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we give bread to your weary men? And then he took the elders of the city, and using the thorns and briars of the wilderness, he disciplined the men of Succoth. He also pulled down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. So, let's look at this situation for what has just happened. Gideon, pursuing the army into the land of the army, comes across a city that belongs to the kings of the army. And the king, they say, we serve the guy you're chasing. We can't give you any sustenance. And he's like, I bet. And then he comes back and he stops somebody. He catches one guy alone and probably tortures him until he gets the 77 names that he's given. And then he goes and he gets these 77 names and uses the thorns and the briars of the wilderness. He disciplines the men of Succoth. That sounds like a pleasant experience, doesn't it? That sounds like absolutely something that the God of all creation, who said, Shed not the blood of man, would inform you or instruct you to do. This is the direction that you should take. These people who were doing right by their authority should be punished by torture. Yep, sounds legit. And next, Gideon asked Zebah and Zalmunna, What kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, they answered, each one resembling the son of a king. They were my brothers, Gideon replied, the son of my mother. And as surely as the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. But, and so he said to Jethro, his firstborn, Get up and kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword. He was fearful, because he was still a youth. And then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Get up and kill yourself, for as the man is, so is his strength. So Gideon got up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments from the necks of their camels. The crescent ornaments are significant in light of things. Right? We're not going to get into that on here because that is big beef for a lot of people currently, and I don't want to trigger any computer programs. But shout out to Jethro, or to Zebah and Zalmunna. Like, at least they had nuts, right? At least they were men. Because Gideon says, like, he captures these people and he carries them to Succoth and says, Here they are. And he's like, You made fun of me, so now I'm going to discipline your people. And he pulls down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of that city. And then he asked them, he said, What kind of men did you kill? And they said that it was your family. Men that look like you. Each one resembling the son of a king. That can be a whole bloodlines argument, right? But he says, They were my brothers, the son of my mother, and as surely as the Lord lives, I would not kill you. But he doesn't want to kill you. He's like, Hey, you kill them. He tells his son, You take this blood upon your hands. And that's another thing that I would never do. Zebulun and Zalmunna would not have to tell me to do the justice that God has called me to do. And I'm not going to try to shunt it off onto my son. As for me, I know that I can do what must be done. And better ever that I should do than ever should my son. And if, dear sir, you're telling me that killing must be done, then it's killing I shall be about, and I'll save it from my son. And then the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon replied, I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord shall rule over you. And then he added, let me make a request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his plunder. For the enemies had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. That's the crescent, right? The people who were actually the firstborn and the birthright and all of that. And we will give them gladly, they replied. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw an earring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold earrings he had requested was 1,700 shekels, in addition to the crescent ornaments, the pendants, the purple garments of the kings of Midian, and the chains from the necks of their camels. And from all this Gideon made an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household, because they were expressly denied the ability to do that. And the fact that it happened was God not keeping covenant. The fact that it happened and then he was blessed, that's beyond not keeping covenant. In this way, Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. And so the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. And he, Jerubbaal, son of Joash, returned home and settled down. And Gideon had 70 sons of his own, since he had many wives. His concubine, who dwelt in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Later, Gideon, son of Joash, died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. But as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves with Baals, and they set up Baal Berith as their god. The Israelites failed to remember the Lord their God had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for Israel. And that's where we are going to wrap up today. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I know that I hold some very unconventional beliefs, and I don't try to step on toes. I'm not exactly sorry if it happens, because it is part of the process, but it is not my intention. My intention is to shine light on the inconsistencies and the problems. Like, God cannot be inconsistent. God cannot not keep his covenant. Like, if he actually made the covenant to do a thing for you, he will do it for you, not your son. If he says that I will not cast my wrath upon your children, then he won't, but he does. If he says that if you serve other gods, I will not bless you, and then he does, that is a problem with him being consistent. If he blesses somebody for 40 years who built an altar after being expressly denied the right to build an altar, like expressly denied, that is part of the covenant. You only worship at the approved altar. There is no sacrifice outside of that. That was the covenant. And so either this was the making of a new covenant, which it was not, or it was a blasphemy against the old one. It's that simple. I'm not doing it. It's here. It's written down. He literally broke covenant to begin the campaign. And then what happens on the campaign is bad, right? But It is literally one of the few times that God intercedes. God intercedes. And I think that the the lightning casting, that's probably it. Especially in light of all the other stuff we have seen dealing with that type of a situation. It's probably the lightning. They had, in my belief, access to technology that we don't. The ability to focus light or sound or electricity or something into a cohesive thing. It is how they manipulate the water and fire. It's how he opened up the earth. It's through the manipulation of these things. And I think that the tabernacle acts as an electrical source, and I think that maybe these ram horns are like a portable one. Like when you blow the horn, it powers the torch, right? That's probably what happened. I can't say that for sure. We won't never know that until we get there, but that's the most likely scenario for me. It's not outside of the scope of God for me, and so I'm okay with it. So, the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.